So the next part is, what I like to talk about is actually, and it looks like a lot of you are cooks. So that's what it takes too to eat well on a budget, is cooking. Buying in bulk, cooking. Going back to basics, rice, beans, basic commodities, buying ingredients instead of processed foods. So we've got a list here of some of the, like going back to Grandma and Grandpa's, how they did it. And cooking is a big part of it. Buying in bulk is another big part of it. For fresh vegetables, sprouting is, you can't really beat the nutrition in sprouts. You can sprout almost anything. You can sprout lentils, are easy. For me, lentils are the easiest things to sprout. And you can either just eat them in a salad, you can actually make soup out of that afterwards. So sprouting is a really good and inexpensive way to get nutrition that you really can't beat, in the winter especially. And when you've got your garden growing, that's another thing. When you can pick it out of the garden, you can't really beat that. But sprouting is one thing that really is a good idea to do. So it's a doing thing.
How do you sprout lentils?
You just soak, just like anything else. You soak them for a while and then you rinse them a few times. It's just like any sprout. Well, maybe you don't know how to sprout anything else, but it's just like sprouting anything else.
You have to wait till they start growing, you mean?
What's
They
that?
grow?
It actually grows a tail on it, yeah. They're very peppery, that's my favorite actually. And they're actually easier to grow for me than the alfalfa, which most people grow.
You soak them overnight?
Yeah. And then if you go on the internet,
a towel or something?
Well, I just leave them in the jar, in a quart jar, and you don't need a lot of equipment. You just a quart jar and some cheesecloth, and that's your sprouting equipment. I've had different sprouting things, pieces of equipment that weren't really high tech, but they were more than you really need, and we don't use them anymore. So another thing I do is this. I'm going to speak from my own. What I do is bread making. I make sourdough bread. I brought it the last time I spoke to you. But that way you can turn $1's worth of ingredients into $5 worth of bread. So again, it takes time, and I've worked on my recipes I've been doing it for 2 or 3 years. But a really good book if you want to get started in sourdough baking is Bread Alone. That's the one I started with. But that's another. What's that?
You don't use do you use a bread machine, or do you?
No,
do this
no. I've made my own starters, and most of them I really like to make like freeform. Actually, what I make mostly now is I make 2 kinds. I make a no-knead bread. There's a website called Breadtopia, and he has videos on there of all these things. And I make a no-knead sourdough bread that looks like a magazine.
Yeah.
Looks like a bread out of a magazine. I cook it in a Dutch oven. It takes like a day, 24 hours, but most of it's just waiting, just leaving it set. So that's another thing that I think people are going to get back to is it's making and baking and old habits maybe like that. But it's one of the things that keeps my life interesting is baking bread. That's all I bake. I don't bake much else, but I can't not bake now because other people in my house won't let me stop. And I grind my own grain too for most of it. I don't make my white flour, but I grind my own whole grains. So actually Katie gave me my grinder. We had some meeting, some discussion group, and I said I'd really like one, and she said, well, I got one. You want it? I said, sure. So sprouting is not what I usually put at the beginning, but bread making is one of those things that's really fulfilling to me, and like I said, you can't really beat the quality. And if you go to sourdough, I mean, it's a whole different thing than a yeasted bread. It's healthier, it's nutritious, it's more easily digestible. But I don't make anything with sourdough. I don't use yeast.